Today, I'd like to talk about the timeline placement of Tears of the Kingdom and why I feel like the most logical place to put it is in the adult timeline. Before we get started, let's knock a few things out of the way that we can disregard right now. We're told upfront in Breath of the Wild interviews these games take place on a timeline. But which one? The Zelda team, Aonuma Onuma specifically, says we can play the game and figure it out, meaning there is an answer. It is on a timeline branch, so the chance of a convergence isn't likely, so we're not talking about that any more than this. Secondly, there is nothing stating northern Hyrule was flooded. Yes, there's a lot of water, but it's also right next to the sea and rivers, so that makes sense. That's why I'm not too keen to put it in the downfall timeline anymore, but I can still see the evidence for that timeline. Lastly, and I'll probably repeat this a few times in this video, the child timeline is the one timeline that is 100% absolutely positively deconfirmed. It is literally impossible. And that's where we will start. This is page 401 from Creating a Champion, the localization of the Masterworks, which was published by Nintendo in Japan. So not like the Dark Horse books, which were outsourced to a third party for those that bothers. It reads, Calamity Ganon's ties to the Gerudo. The Gerudo are a proud nation of women. They give birth exclusively to females and only allow women into their capital, Gerudo Town. It is a long-held belief that men only bring disaster. However, long ago, it is said that a boy was born to the Gerudo tribe every 100 years and, per tradition, became king of the Gerudo. It is written that Calamity Ganon once adopted the form of a Gerudo, and since he was the rare male born to the Gerudo, was made king. But that wasn't enough for the man known as Ganondorf. He plotted to seize control of all Hyrule and become the great king of evil. The only person standing in the way of his machinations was a young man with the soul of the hero who wielded the Master Sword. His plans shattered. Ganondorf lost control and his powers consumed him, transforming him into the dark beast Ganon. After being defeated by the hero, he was sealed away by Princess Zelda and the other sages. His hatred of the hero and the princess is legendary. He revived again and again, only to be sealed many times over. Eventually, the Demon King Ganon became hatred and malice incarnate, holding a deep grudge against Hyrule itself. According to Gerudo records, there has not been another male Gerudo leader since the king who became the Calamity. Though Ganondorf was a member of the Gerudo, one of the sages who sealed him away was also a Gerudo. Her name was Naboru. The divine beast, Val Naboris, is named in her honor, and her legend is still passed down with reverence. The champion Urbosa and Chief Riju both greatly admire her. It is said that, long ago, the ancient Gerudo had rounded ears. The prevailing theory is that the shape of their ears changed gradually after so many generations of partnering with Highland Vows, but a competing narrative is more supernatural in nature. There is a story that the shame that the Gerudo felt over giving birth to the source of calamity Ganon so long ago opened them up to listening for messages from the goddesses. So, they came to have the same long, pointed ears as the Highlands, which some believe allowed them to receive special messages from the divine. The heading indicates the page's purpose is to inform us on the Calamity's ties to the Gerudo. The Calamity was once a Gerudo male who became king, but wasn't satisfied and plotted to control all of Hyrule, becoming the great king of evil. That is his title in Ocarina of Time. You can see it pop up when fighting him in the Ganon's castle. Ganondorf was opposed by a hero wielding the Master Sword who shattered his plans. Then he lost control of his power and transformed into Ganon. Ganon challenged the hero and was defeated before being sealed away by Zelda and the sages. Ganon then revived again and again, only to be sealed many times over. We've seen one of these sealings at the end of Wind Waker, when the Master Sword is inserted in Ganondorf's head and he is turned to stone and lost at the bottom of the sea. The rest are off-screen revivals and sealings that we have not seen yet. So, the calamity is sourced to Ocarina of Time Ganondorf. It's something that came from him after time had passed, and repeated revivals and sealings led to him hating Hyrule, the princess and the hero, so much that he became hatred and malice incarnate. That is the title of Dark Beast Ganon in Breath of the Wild. So, the point of the page is, the Gerudo are tied to the calamity by Ocarina of Time Ganondorf being its source, him previously being a male king of the Gerudo. The page also indirectly confirms the timeline placement of Breath of the Wild by letting us know that the events we saw on screen in Ocarina of Time are canon to Breath of the Wild's history. So, it's in the adult timeline, the one where Link shattered Ganondorf's plans for the Triforce in the match of Dead Man's Volley in the castle, where Ganondorf lost control of his powers when his attempt to bury Link and Zelda in the castle failed, transforming him into Ganon, before he was defeated by the hero and then sealed by Zelda and the sages. All in that order, it's a perfect match. So now we can move from Breath of the Wild and look at Tears of the Kingdom. How does Tears of the Kingdom Ganondorf relate to all the above? Well, in Tears of the Kingdom, we know that the calamity is sourced to this guy Tears Ganondorf. We see for ourselves when Zelda mentions it that his gloom has been pulling up down below Hyrule Castle non-stop. It's why they go to check it out, despite it being forbidden, even to the royal family, to go below the castle. Back to Breath of the Wild for a second, in that it's stated in red text that the calamity came from below Hyrule Castle. So, we have a person later revealed to be Ganondorf, spewing gloom constantly, located where Calamity Ganon came from. This pretty clearly shows that Tears of the Kingdom Ganondorf is the source of the calamity. It just takes 10,000 years of gloom pulling up for him to create the calamity and send it up to the surface, and all that gloom had just been sealed by Zelda at the end of Breath of the Wild, so there's only whatever he is currently pumping out down there. So what does this mean? Either everything above is canon and this Ganondorf is also the one mentioned on page 401, Ocarina of Time Ganondorf, or Tears of the Kingdom retconned that page and the source is actually this Ganondorf. Well, is there anything on page 401 that could help us know which it is here? Yes. It is said that long ago the ancient Gerudo had rounded ears. The prevailing theory is that the shape of their ears changed gradually after so many generations of partnering with Highland Vows, but a competing narrative is more supernatural in nature. There is a story that the shame that the Gerudo felt over giving birth to the source of Calamity Ganon so long ago opened them up to listening for messages from the goddesses. So, they came to have the same long, pointed ears as the Highlands, which some believe allow them to receive special messages from the divine. This tells us that there is a Gerudo timeline of Ocarina of Time when they had round ears, 2. The Gerudo partner with Highland men till their offspring starts to have the pointed ears of the Highlands, 2. Modern pointy-eared Gerudo. Ganondorf in Tears of the Kingdom has round ears. He is Ocarina of Time Ganondorf. If he were a new one and that page were retconned, they wouldn't have went out of their way to match the information on that page. In both the founding era and in modern day, the Gerudo have pointy ears. The only Gerudo who doesn't is Ganondorf. That even a single Gerudo has pointy ears in the founding era means that it comes after Ocarina of Time. So, this is a refounding of Hyrule, not the original one. But Hyrule was flooded and wiped off the land at the end of Wind Waker. How is this possible? Well, in Wind Waker, it's stated that the Deku Tree is making a constant effort to connect the islands of the Great Sea with forest. This is the continent that Rauru would found his kingdom on in the distant future, when he would later descend from the heavens to that surface and meet Sonia. This is corroborated in Tears of the Kingdom by looking at the pan shot of the founding era, where you can see that everything is forest. Hyrule Field isn't even a thing yet at that point. It's all just forests. This explains the depths. They're directly below the surface of modern Hyrule. The islands of the Great Sea were above ancient Hyrule and Wind Waker, so if those were connected, then ancient Hyrule would be right below them. Of course, the kingdom itself was washed away. All that remains is empty land down there, which matches the depths pretty well. So if Tears of the Kingdom Ganondorf is Ocarina of Time Ganondorf, then why does he not recognize the hero, Zelda, or the Master Sword? Well, back to trusty page 401. He revived again and again, only to be sealed many times over. Eventually, the Demon King Ganon became hatred and malice incarnate, holding a deep grudge against Hyrule itself. As I mentioned earlier above, after Wind Waker, Ganondorf revived again and again. The cycle of repeated revivals and sealings eventually resulted in him becoming hatred and malice incarnate, which I take to mean he became super angry. Dark Beast Ganon is stated by Zelda in Breath of the Wild to be his pure enraged form. He lost his wits for a time. That transformation could have robbed him of some of his memories. It's also possible he doesn't recognize Zelda and Link because Zelda is a common name in royalty and Link is a different guy. But if that's not enough, then I thought of two other alternatives too. Revival. In Breath of the Wild, Link is revived in the Shrine of Resurrection after taking fatal wounds. He died and revived. A side effect of this, according to Pura, is the amnesia. Ganondorf didn't just revive one time. It says he revived again and again. Are we really so sure that not a single one of those is responsible for the memory loss of his earliest days of existence back in Ocarina of Time? It's also possible that one of those revivals, since the term is used loosely at times, could be revival through reincarnation as a different guy. Like in Four Swords Adventure, this would mean he's still the same guy at his core. He has Ganondorf's soul, but he's a different guy with no memories of his past life. There's two more things I feel the need for to add. What happened to the Master Sword after Wind Waker? Well, given what we see, it should be down in the depths of the earliest days of the founding of this kingdom, discarded when Ganondorf arrived from the seal placed on him by the Hero of Winds at the end of Wind Waker. Ganondorf was below the islands of the Great Seas, in flooded ancient Hyrule. The Master Sword would be down there without some intervention. But is this possible? Does it mesh well with what we see of the founding era in Tears of the Kingdom? Well, yes. Rauru does not know what the Master Sword is, which would make sense if it were lying around discarded somewhere in the depths. We know that at some point it ends up pretty much permanently making its home in Great Hyrule Forest because of the natural sacred power of the earth held in that spot. Someone must have retrieved it and moved it there at some point. Is that possible? Again, yes. Zelda went to the founding era and informed Rauru of the Master Sword's existence. It's likely he would have tasked people with finding the sword. Rauru is traced to the depths. It all lines up well. Page 401 also mentions that there have been no male Gerudo leaders since the one who became Calamity. I've seen people misinterpret this to mean there were no male Gerudos born since him, but the text in question doesn't mention births at all. I'd also like to point out that the text specifies a person, not a time. It doesn't tell us when the Gerudos started their law of only allowing females inside the town and instating female chiefs. It tells us since this guy, which works fine since it's the same guy in Tears' founding era. We see that information, the when, in Tears of the Kingdom, where Ganondorf is, supposedly, according to Rauru, a hero to his people before he kills Sonia and steals her secret stone. Then, he starts trying to conquer Hyrule, and the Gerudo are part of the allied tribes that opposed the Demon King's army in the first part of the Imprisoning War, before Rauru gave the sages their stones. It's said by the ancient Sage of Lightning that he then went around attacking all the free Gerudo villages. She is called the leader of the Gerudo in that scene, not Ganondorf. So, this is when the Gerudo made their law, and the ancient Sage of Lightning was most likely the first Gerudo chief. So, to recap, I think this Hyrule is founded above ancient Hyrule, on the islands of the Great Sea, but way in the future after the islands have been connected by the Deku Tree's efforts. I think so because of Death Mountain. We know he was connecting the islands using his seeds. If the islands were connected with the land of ancient Hyrule down below, that explains where the deaths come from. There would be nothing down there because of Daphne's wish at the end of Wind Waker, just empty land directly below the islands, which about sums up what we see. There's evidence this happened in Tears of the Kingdom too. The map of Hyrule in the Forgotten Temple shows more water in Hyrule at one point, and if you look at the pan shot of Hyrule in the Founding Era memories, you can see that everything was forested during the founding. Even Hyrule Field doesn't exist yet. The entirety of Hyrule was forest. It also explains why Rauru didn't know what the Master Sword was. If this follows the continuity of Wind Waker, then the Master Sword would have been lost somewhere at the bottom of the Great Sea down in ancient Hyrule, so somewhere in the depth. We know it's eventually brought to the pedestal in Great Hyrule Forest and made to rest there for the rest of its existence, up until Breath of the Wild with the Deku Tree watching over it. Since Zelda told Rauru about the sword's existence when she went to the past, and since he is traced to the death, it's possible that he would have ordered someone to find and move it to the pedestal above ground, and they did so at some point later on following his death. Nothing about Rauru being the first king or the founder of the Kingdom of Hyrule seen in Breath of the Wild indicates that it's the first founding of the Kingdom of Hyrule. He's the first king and founder of Breath of the Wild Hyrule. That's the context. Both Rauru and Zelda are talking about their own kingdom. There are plenty of reasons why it's clearly not the first founding. I'm wondering if you know any of them. My favorite two are: Creating a Champion, page 401, gives us a Gerudo timeline of Ocarina of Time to the Gerudo partner with Highland men till their offspring start to have the pointy ears of the Highland race, to all Gerudo have pointy ears. Well, in Tears of the Kingdom, the Gerudo already have pointy ears during the Founding Era, so the Founding Era is after Ocarina of Time. It's an oversight. No, it's not. In those same scenes, they gave Ganondorf round ears to indicate he's Ocarina of Time Ganondorf. The fact that a single Gerudo has pointy ears during the Founding Era places it after the Gerudo had partnered with Highland men for generations, after Ocarina of Time. The Gerudo are part of the allied tribes, subservient to the King of Hyrule. I'll have you remember that there was a whole war necessary to unite the tribes shortly before Ocarina of Time, the Unification War held by that king. The Gerudo were not subservient to any kings of Hyrule up till Ocarina of Time. They had their own king. Some others include Hyrule Castle, having been destroyed in Ocarina of Time in 2 out of 3 timelines and severely damaged in the Child timeline, when the castle in Breath of the Wild is said to have been created after Rauru sealed Ganondorf and has sat there, undamaged, and on that same spot since then. The Temple of Time on the plateau, since people speculate it's the one from Ocarina of Time because of the birthplace of Hyrule line. Just a quick heads up, it's not. Ocarina's temple is where the pedestal of the Master Sword is. Anyway, it is confirmed to have been created after the founding of Hyrule, after Rauru's death and the original temple having been lifted into the sky. That clashes with what Hyrule Historia tells us. In there, it says Hyrule was founded around the Temple of Time from Ocarina. In Tears, the founding came first. The Gerudo law, removing kings and instating female chiefs, simultaneously disallowing men from entering the town. This clearly started with the ancient Sage of Lightning, which would put that event before Ocarina, placing the founding era between Skyward Sword and Minish Cap, where Ganondorf is a Gerudo king. Makes no sense. No one knowing what the Master Sword is during the founding era, when in Ocarina, Navy calls it the Legendary Blade. Just to prove my point, nothing from the adult timeline has been altered, changed, called replicas, or anything of that nature. Meanwhile, stuff like the items from Twilight Princess are immediately called into question. They're not the same item, it just looks like those items, and the biggest culprit is the Sword of the Six Sages, known in this game as the Dusk Claymore. In the text where you find it, it reads, "Among these were 4 Hyruleans." How do you get into the rune? You use the power of the 4 sages. They're the 4 Hyruleans. Why isn't this called the Sword of the Six Sages anymore? People only know of 4, the unnamed Goron, the unnamed Gerudo, as well as Naboru from OOT, the unnamed Rito, the unnamed Zora, as well as Rito from OOT. Mineru wasn't only forgotten, but she wasn't a Hyrulean. She comes from the heavens first, and foremost, she's a Zonai. The tribes of Hyrule, regardless of race, are Hyruleans. They're not Highlands, but they're Hyruleans. This sword is not the same one from Twilight, and that's purposeful. Phantom Ganon's armor is that armor. In Japanese, they go as far as to say this armor belongs to an interdimensional spirit, which we know for a fact because of his boss fight in Ocarina of Time. He can travel through paintings, and he was trapped in the gap between dimensions. The Biggoron sword is just said to be wielded by a hero who traveled through time. Same with the goddess White Sword that Hylia herself gives to you. Ocarina has no items that are called into question. Same with Skyward Sword, but the second we get into the games in On the Timeline branches, there's items that are only replicas and copies, or even worse in this case, not even the same weapon, just share the same design. There are some very real things from the child's timeline. I'm not saying there's not. The Dusk Bow is clearly the real bow of light. Both the description and its functionality gives credence to that. The NES Zelda items are real, but then Link's Awakening is a costume of that Link. And I know the argument is that it's to fit the art style, but okay, if that were true, Wind Waker Link would be a costume. The Phantom armors would look different, but not at all. The adult timeline is solid. I know a lot of people point to the pajamas of Wind Waker Link, but it doesn't knock it out of the race. Not only does the description of a little fishing village in the south match the location of Outset, again, we're told verbatim in creating a champion that Link fought Ganon in Ocarina, and he won. We really only have 2 options. It's the adult timeline or it's a new timeline. A timeline where the hero of time stayed. But that's headcanon, and if you accept that, by all means, I won't stop you. But we were told these games have a place on one of the branches, and the only one completely out of the conversation is the child's timeline, and the adult timeline feels the most plausible. Before I close this off, I want to say nothing here is definitive, but from what we do know, the child's timeline is absolutely, positively out of the question. Creating a champion 100% refutes it. This is not connected to Twilight Princess in any way. You can argue from the Japanese version of the book that the Downfall timeline is still open to discussion. In fact, that used to be my personal placement. However, looking at the evidence we have now, I feel like it's saying the same thing. The English version is just worded differently. So, the events of Ocarina of Time happened in this universe, and specifically, the events were Link 1, meaning we have to be in the Wind Waker universe far after Spirit tracks. But if I missed anything, by all means, let me know your thoughts in the comments.